Ladies and gentlemen, here on our channel, we do a lot of water-cooled PCs, so I think it's fair to say that we know our fair share about water cooling fittings. 2019 is a brand new year, and with that, we wanted to make an updated water cooling fittings tutorial guide for you guys. There have been some new releases of fittings, which I want to bring to your attention, but I also want to touch on some of the older fittings as well, so you have everything in one guide, which can help you to achieve your next water-cooled PC. Hey guys, my name is Corey and we are all about making custom PCs and tutorials to help you guys achieve your ultimate dream PC. So if you're into content like that, then consider subscribing. I hope you all enjoy. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's bring us down to the basics to begin with, and then we'll work our way up. So beginning your first water-cooled PC, the steps involved are actually more simple than you think. Think of it as like an adult Lego, if you will. To begin with, typically, you would go with something like soft tubing. Soft tubing is a lot easier than hard tubing. It is more affordable and it is much easier to do. With soft tubing, you don't have to plan out as much because there is a lot of forgiving when it comes to the tubes being so flexible. Being so flexible means you don't have to fork out money on different bend fittings or anything like that. So you're saving so much money because all you have to do is plug all of the ports which are joining all of the water cooling components together. So what are the typical fittings that you would be looking for when it comes to a water-cooled PC using soft tubing? Our very first fitting that we want to touch on today is called the Barb Fitting. Now, a lot of people don't really use the barbs too much these days. However, some people still do, so I feel like it is an important one to touch on. So the Barb Fitting is one of those fittings that has been around for a while. It is the beginning fitting that everyone would use. Once upon a time, this was the top dog when it came to water cooling. Nowadays, it is a bit more outdated as there are new and better options out there. However, people still do use this fitting. This fitting is simply a plug and play fitting. What happens is the tube actually fits over the barb itself, and the compression between the barb and the tube is what makes that watertight seal. It is pretty simple, but over time the tube does adjust to this and the tube can actually become loose. Now, a lot of people did combat this by putting some clamps on it or simply putting some zip ties on there, which actually held the tube a bit tighter and didn't allow it to deform as much on the barb itself. Personally, I didn't like to use the barb fittings as there was a better option available. Our second option for the soft tubing is, of course, the compression fitting. This is essentially exactly the same as a barb fitting, except it has a compression ring around the fitting itself, which actually presses the soft tube onto the barb itself, creating that watertight seal. So you can see it's got a similar design to the barb. However, we also have this ring which presses the tube on the edge there, creating the watertight seal. Let me demonstrate how this actually works to you guys. So firstly, what you want to do is you want to grab the compression ring and insert that onto the tube like so. After that, you can insert the tube on the barb section of the fitting itself, which creates the watertight seal between the barb and the tube. Now what you can do is you can simply do this compression ring up, creating another watertight seal, and it also helps to hold that tube in place. Pretty neat and a pretty good upgrade from the barb fittings. So by using the compression rings, you're saving on money, but the good thing about this is that the compression ring, when you're bending a tube, actually stops the tube from getting loose and popping off the fitting itself, whereas the barbs, if you have a more of a tighter bend, the tube could actually pop off. So these are a lot more safer to use for your soft tube builds. In today's water cooling society, the most common fitting is called the compression fitting. However, I want to visit an older style fitting, which basically did the exact same job as a compression fitting. These are called push fittings. Now, these were invented before the compression fitting was out, and what it does is the tube inserts inside. There are two O-rings on the inside of this little fitting right here, which actually create a watertight seal around that hard tube, whether it be PETG, acrylic, or some sort of metal. Now, fittings like these are great. They are exactly the same as the compression fittings, However, without the compression part, the only compression being made is between the tube and the O-rings themselves. So let me demonstrate how this actually works. This push fitting has two O-rings on the inside. Now when you grab your tube, making sure that it is deburred, because if it was not deburred and there was some sharp edges around this tube, all you have preventing you from having a leak is two O-rings on the inside. If you do have those sharp edges, those could cut those O-rings and create leaks in the system. So to do this, you grab your fitting and you just push the tube in like so, and the watertight seal is created between the O-rings and the tube. Pretty simple procedure, and I still do consider these a really good option in today's water cooling age. So a step up from this push fitting here would be our compression fittings. These come in a range of colors. They all do the exact same job, and what they do is they have a compression ring, just like our soft tube ring, which compresses against the O-ring against the tube. Let me demonstrate how this actually works. So firstly, what you want to do is you want to undo the compression ring from the actual fitting itself. Inside, you will find a separate O-ring which goes around the tube, and of course the compression ring. Again, grabbing your tube, making sure it is deburred, what you want to do is you want to insert the compression ring on the tube first, followed by the O-ring. Now that both of them are on, we can insert this into the fitting itself. Now, inside of the fitting will be a number of O-rings, again, just like the push fitting that we demonstrated earlier. Once you have the tube inside, simply bring the O-ring right down to the bottom as far as you can, then let the compression ring drop, and by doing this up, you are squeezing that O-ring that you saw on the tube against the tube and the fitting itself, creating a watertight seal there, plus you still have that watertight seal on the inside of the fitting as well. Now, this is probably the most common fitting that you will see in today's water-cooled builds. If you are confident in bending all of your tubes, then these will be inexpensive towards your water cooling loop, as you are just using these to join the tubes from one water cooling component to the other by doing the bends yourself. Before we move on, I would also like to bring your attention to this particular fitting right here. This here is a new design by Thermaltake. I believe that they've had this out for about a year now. This is their Pro Series fittings, and this is a little different to the compression fittings which I showed you earlier on. For this particular fitting, you still have the compression made against the tube. This has 5 O-rings in total inside, which help to stop the water from leaking. So you have your original compression ring. You also have the spare O-ring, which is to go over the tube itself. We also have this little ring here, which contains 2 separate O-rings, which goes around the tube, creating another watertight seal. And then we have the actual threaded part of the fitting itself, which is the unique part about this. Now, the way this particular fitting works is that it allows you to get your tubes the perfect length for the water cooling, and it allows you to be able to easily install that. So if you had 2 pieces of water cooling hardware and you needed a tube to go in between them at the perfect length, what you would do is you'd have your piece of hardware, you would insert the fitting onto the hardware, and this creates a really flat surface. Now, if you had another radiator here, there's a certain distance between it which your tube needs to be. But if you had 2 fittings, which was, say, like our push fittings or our original compression fittings, for example, the tube would be very hard to get the perfect size and get it in between both of them. Now, because this is completely flat, you can make the tube the exact size it needs to be and get it in between without any issues. So let me demonstrate how this actually works. So you have your fitting on the hardware itself. Firstly, what you want to do is you want to insert the compression ring on the tube like so. Next, you want to insert the O-ring like so. Now, this part here you want to leave on the table, and you can push your tube down so that it is flat with the surface of the table and it does not go past this ring, because this ring creates compression with the O-ring on this tube to create another watertight seal. So by placing this onto the O-ring, your tube is touching the bottom part of the fitting. You press the O-ring down as far as it can go. you let this compression ring go down all the way, and then you do that up, and this has 3 points at which this is being sealed. So that's just another option for the end user out there. For those of you who do want to attempt a hardline water-cooled PC, but you do not have the confidence to bend the tubes yourselves, there are options out there for you guys. Here we have the 90-degree fittings right here. We have one where the tube comes in one side and out the other, and one that actually screws into the water blocks themselves, so you can have a 90-degree fitting coming straight out of the water cooling hardware. So let me demonstrate to you guys how these type of fittings actually work in the system, and whether you would want to buy these, keeping in mind that it will incur a lot extra money. However, if you want to use it for aesthetics as well, then a lot of people actually do go for this kind of option instead of bending the tubes. So just like in any water-cooled system, there are 90-degree bends that will have to be made, whether it be done by the tubes, the fittings, or the water cooling components themselves. Let me demonstrate how one of these would actually work inside of a system. So instead of having a tube coming straight out with your normal compression fitting, what you can actually do is buy these 90-degree fittings which actually have a compression ring on the end of them. So you would attach a tube just like you would the compression fitting. However, this time you are applying this to the water cooling hardware so that the tube can come out at a 90-degree angle. So if I insert this tube like so, you can see it inserts just like normal, and then you would obviously have the compression ring on the top and the tube would come out at a 90-degree angle. So the benefit of having these fittings is you know that they are exactly 90 degrees, so you're not guessing with your bends, and it will give you that perfect tube run. So what if you want a 90-degree bend during a tube run and not out of a piece of hardware? That is where a fitting like this 90-degree fitting right here comes in handy. On each side of this 90-degree fitting is, of course, the compression rings, just like the first compression fitting that we showed you. So by simply undoing both of them, you can insert your tube into one side, the water will flow through, and then out the other tube coming out the other side. This is a nice, clean, simple way to add a bit more color into your system, as well as a nice 90-degree bend. So if you're not confident in bending your tubes, this is certainly an option, or if you like the aesthetics behind having the fittings doing the bends for you, definitely choose this option. However, it will incur some more costs to your water cooling loop. As well as the 90-degree fittings, you can achieve different angles. We have here a 45-degree fitting. Now, some of these actually do come with the compression ring built onto this. However, this particular one doesn't. So what you would do is you'd grab your normal compression ring and you would just screw that in like so. This is a normal G1/4 inch threaded fitting, and it would work just like all of the other fittings. You'd insert your tube, you'd do up the compression ring, and that would create the watertight seal. Just another option out there for those of you who don't want to necessarily go for your traditional 90-degree bends or anything like that. You can put a bit of 45-degree angles, 30 degrees, 60 degrees, and I believe there is more which are available out for the public. The next fitting is probably one of the more important ones, which would really help save you some time and energy in a water-cooled PC. This is the valve fitting, and this makes it so important for cleaning and maintaining your water cooling loops when it comes to a custom water cooled PC. Now you can get these valve fittings in various different forms, but here I have the most common one, and these simply work just like a tap would. You'd open and close, which would open and close the inside of the valve to let water drain out. So here I have a couple for you. This particular one actually comes with a built-in rotating male connector, so you can actually screw this straight into the reservoir. However, these three don't, so a great purchase to make with one of these would be one of these rotating fittings, so that inside of your water cooled loop, this thing's not actually upside down. Because this has the rotating section on it, you can place this upways. Now there is a couple of things that you actually need to consider before purchasing these, and that is looking at your pump reservoir to see how you would actually drain the system. So here I have a reservoir right here. This only has one outlet, so we have to keep that in mind when it comes to purchasing our fittings. Not only do we need to make sure that the water continues up and around the loop, we also need a way to be able to drain the loop in the future when it comes to cleaning out the system. So we cannot simply just screw one of these in and call it a day. We have to come up with something. That is where fittings like these T-joints or Q-joints or whatever you want to call them come in very handy. They have multiple outlets on them, and that allows us to be able to not only continue our water cooling loop, but also attach one of these valve fittings. So your reservoir pump combo would be set up in the loop like so. Then what you'd do is you would attach this Q fitting right here, doing it up nice and tight. Now you have many ports available depending on what way you want to run your tube. So you'd have your compression fitting coming out like so, joined onto this tube. You'd have your tube running up, that would be connected. And then on the outside or at the front, you could have your valve fitting connected, making sure that it is closed, of course. This one is open. It works just like a tap. You turn it and it closes the inside of the fitting, like so. And then what you would do is you'd put a stop fitting on the end just in case there is any small leakage. So by doing that up, you are preventing that from leaking. Now this is compressed by an O-ring, so there is no worries right there. Now the good thing about this particular fitting right here that we put on is it allows us to rotate it as much as we want, so that we can have it facing upside down if that is what we desire, or we can have it facing the right way. Now, when it comes to actually draining the system, it is important to have this fitting at a very low point in the system so we can drain the largest amount of volume of water. Now, simply having this does not make it very easy. We need to figure out some other things. Now, what I have come up with is I always have a spare piece of soft tube with a compression ring on the end. So when it comes to draining the loop, what I would do is I'd remove this stop fitting at the end, keeping in mind that this is always closed. So now by removing that, I can grab my soft tube. I can screw that in. It is just a regular G1/4 inch threading, so that will go in like so. And then what I can do is, because I have all of this slack on the end with the soft tube, I can just put a bucket on the end to catch all of the liquid. Now what you would do in your water cooling loop is you would now open the valve, making sure you've got the bucket at the end. You will start to see water trickling out. It will not gush out immediately, because what you need to do is you need to replace something in the loop with the liquid. So you would have to open up one of your spare ports up the top of the reservoir, take off your stop fitting like so, and what that will do is it will allow air to get in, which will replace the liquid. Now once you undo this, be mindful that the liquid will start coming out very fast, so make sure the bucket is ready. Now, as well as those Q joints, as I said, you could have like a T joint right here. So you would simply insert one of these fittings like so with the rotating end, and then you could insert this into the outlet of the pump like so. So you can actually have the T fitting facing whichever way that you please. You can have your tube run going up the top, just like before. And then you could also insert your valve fitting on the end. So there's many different options for this. It just depends what you think looks visually more pleasing for your water cooling loop. So all of the fittings that I have shown you up to this point in the video are pretty much the typical ones you would normally come across in a water cooling loop. However, there is a few special mentions which do get the exception of featuring in a couple of water cooled PCs, and they do come in very handy. So the first one I want to show you guys is the extension fittings. Now you can get these in many different sizes, and these really help out when it comes to tight spaces, like going from a radiator up the top, which is right next to a fan, and you can't get the actual fitting up there, so you need these to actually bring the fitting past the fans to do it up. So for this particular example, I'd like you to pretend that this radiator is up the top of your water-cooled PC. You have your fan on it, and this is the situation that a lot of people would face, and this is why extensions come in very handy. Now imagine if you wanted a 90-degree bend out of this. So we've got our 90-degree fitting right here, and we want to try and do it up, but unfortunately the fan is preventing us from doing it up because it overlaps the edge. So what a lot of people might like to do is grab an extension fitting to actually bring it past the clearance of the fan and then put the 90-degree fitting on top of that so that they can create their 90-degree bend. Now that is some situations that you will find this coming in handy. Another scenario could be that someone wants one of their bends to run nice and parallel and into another piece of water cooling hardware. So say we had our CPU block right here, and then we had an extension coming right out of that, and then we had our 90-degree fitting attached to that extension. Now the extension could act as a lengthen to the 90-degree so that the tube could come out nice and parallel and straight into another piece of hardware, so it's running nice and straight. That's more for aesthetics. Now, of course, there are different various sizes, so I do recommend trying to plan out your loop a bit before you actually go ahead and purchase your fittings. Now, this next fitting I consider to be more for the professionals, the ones who are more comfortable with actually modifying a piece of hardware or the case itself to be able to create a clean custom loop. These are called bulkhead fittings. Now, how these work is they go through a panel and allow you to actually route your water cooling loop through that panel and into the back to create a nice clean design. So let's actually take a closer look at these fittings. Now, bulkhead or pass-through fittings are a pretty simple design. However, they create the most complex and awesome looking loops in a water-cooled PC. Now, how these work requires you to modify your case a tiny bit in order to be able to use these fittings. Now, what you would have to do is you would have to drill a hole through the panel or a bit of acrylic or some sort of material in your case so that the tube can pass through to the other side. Now, when creating that hole, what you would do is you would undo this ring at the back of the fitting, like so. You would drill your hole big enough so that this fitting can pass through. However, it stops at this ring here. So don't drill it any bigger than this ring on the end. You'd put this through your panel, and then the panel would be on the inside, and you'd do the ring back up at the back of the panel. You now have a hole going straight through your panel, which you are able to route your tubes through. So what you'd do is you'd grab your compression fittings like so, you'd put one on each side, do them up nice and tight, and then you can run your tubes from one panel to the other side of the panel to create a nice clean look. That is how we are able to create some nice clean designs with some of our PCs. Now keep in mind, this is for those who are a lot more comfortable with doing their water cooling and they're not afraid to drill holes in their computer cases. Now the last fitting, well, not so much a fitting, but it is a component that is brand new to a water cooling loop, has not been out for a very long time, and I have not touched on this before, is a temperature sensor. Now, this is not needed for a water cooling loop. However, it is good if you want to monitor a certain part of the loop and know what temperature that the water is at that part. So how does this actually work in a water cooling loop? Now, there are many variations of the temperature sensor, and just like the pass-through fitting, this one requires a fitting on each side so that the liquid can pass through the middle. Now, in the middle of this sensor is, of course, a technology which can read the temperature of your liquid, and that will display it on the screen right here. So by putting a compression fitting on this side and one on the other, it is simply just flowing through from one side to the other and just continuing on your straight run in the loop. Guys, so that pretty much does it for our water cooling fittings guide. I hope that I answered a lot of your questions and addressed a lot of concerns when it comes to all of the different fittings on the market. Now, the first couple of fittings that I did show are the more common ones which you will find in your water cooling loop. I did show you a few extras in case you guys wanted to attempt something a bit different in your water cooling setup. Now, there are many other fittings out there, but I felt like these were the most relevant ones to show you guys in order to create your first successful water cooling loop. Now, I will leave links down in the description below if you guys want to check out some of these fittings. I will try and include all of the ones that I did show you if I can find them on Amazon or anything like that. Guys, if you enjoy videos like this, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, leaving your comments down below. What other water cooling tutorials do you guys want to see and we will make that happen. We also have a Patreon, guys. If you are interested in supporting the channel, it is much appreciated. Thanks for your support, guys, and we'll see you all in the next one.